Patrick, are you on with us?
I am here. Yes, sir.
Excellent, excellent. Let me give you a brief introduction. Joining us on the line is Patrick Wood. Patrick Wood is an author and lecturer who has studied elite globalization policies since the late 1970s, when he partnered with the late Anthony Sutton to co author Trilaterals over Washington, Volumes 1 and 2. He remains a leading expert on the elitist Trilateral Commission, their policies and achievements in creating their self proclaimed new international economic order. An economist by education, a financial analyst and writer by profession, and an American constitutionalist by choice, Wood maintains a biblical worldview and has deep historical insights into the modern attacks on sovereignty, property rights, and personal freedom. Such attacks are epitomized by the implementation of UN policies such as Agenda 21, sustainable development, smart growth, and in education, the widespread adoption of Common Core. Wood is a frequent speaker and guest on radio shows around the nation. His current research builds on trilateral commission hegemony, focusing on transhumanism, technocracy, and scientism, and how these are co opting economics, politics, and religion around the world. Patrick Wood, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon on the Liberty Brothers radio show.
Hey, great to be with you, Jim. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Patrick, I'm almost speechless here because I mean, what you've done is, Jason and I, my co-host Jason, who's with us here, of course, also, we have talked about a lot of these issues that you've talked about. We've covered them, not in such great depth, of course, but what you've managed to do here in your great work is you've really tied all of these different AB, alphabet organizations, the Trilateral Commission, the World Bank, you name it, United Nations. They really are. I mean, there's not a conspiracy, Pat. They really are all working together for this technocratic dream, are they not?
What they are. This has been brewing for a very long time, and the thing that has been missing all these years has been a certain knowledge of exactly who the enemy is and what their strategy is. And basically, for all these years, we've been working with bits and pieces of the problem because we can clearly see when we're under attack in a certain area. But recognizing the enemy is key to winning the war. And I'm sad to say that after 40 years of hard work by many freedom-loving Americans, we're worse off today than we've ever been in the history of our country. And this has to change.
Now,
This simply
Patrick,
has to change.
this is Jason. Thank you for joining us today. It seems to me we're really literally entering the end game of things. It seems like things have been building to a crescendo for quite some time, and they're now getting all their pieces in place for that end game. That they really are going to drop the hammer on the New World Order. That there's a lot of talk about there might be a crash or whatever it might be, whatever their end game. And we know they always have multiple attacks coming at us at any time. But would you agree with me there? Do you think that we're going to see the final stages of things begin to unplay this year or maybe next?
Well, we are right now. And I use the analogy of project management techniques that are well documented in business and industry and government, whatever. But when a very complex project is undertaken by anybody, say building a ship or something, the actual planning phase and design phase and all logistics and all that kind of stuff, that might take years to get everything lined up to where you can actually start constructing the ship. And we see this in buildings too, like when you drive down the street and all of a sudden there's a building there and you say, where the heck did that come? I wasn't here last week. And they're already half done building the thing up. And well, it's not that it wasn't in planning for 5 years or 10 years. It's just that the fruit of it doesn't happen until the very last stage of the project. And that's what we're seeing here. The project has been underway in planning phase for decades. And we're seeing the superstructure go up all of a sudden, and nobody has been aware of the various pieces that have been assembling. Like the metal girders and the electrical wire and all this other stuff that's been sitting at ground level. Nobody paid attention to it. It just looked like a storage yard. And yet all of a sudden, when they all jump on it and start to make something out of it, everybody's all surprised. And people are surprised today. And this is a natural phenomena of simple project management. These people have been working on this for decades while we've been basically asleep. And we're seeing the fruit of it now, and it's coming very, very rapidly because they were laying the entire project at the same time. For instance, Common Core wasn't a project that was laid independently of everything else, nor was Smart Grid, nor was councils of governments and the reinvention of government, nor was public-private partnerships. All these different things. They're not individual projects. They're all connected, and they were all organized and prepared for at the same time. And now we see them building up that superstructure like crazy all around us. We're going, whoa, where did this come from? We shouldn't rise at this point if we look back and understand the whole process. The unfortunate thing is we're way behind the curve. We don't have any projects going, really. And we're behind the curve at this point. They've had a 40-year head start, and we're trying to get into the race or the game, if you will, now. It's going to be very difficult. It doesn't mean we don't try, but it's going to be very difficult to catch up and or figure out how to throw a monkey wrench or two into their project. So here we are talking. That's a good thing we're talking about it, though. I have to say that.
Indeed. Pat, there was everybody hasn't been asleep at the wheel. You've been at this for quite some time, and there was a part in your book, and it was so, it seemed to be sort of providence how you ran in to Anthony Sutton. If I remember correctly, there was a gold conference in town, and all the seats were filled, and you actually had to share a table with a complete stranger if you wanted to sit down. And certainly, correct me if I'm wrong, but you actually happened to sit right down across from Anthony Sutton, of all people. Talk a little bit about that, about Anthony Sutton, your work with him, and I've got a couple of his books. The guy was just a brilliant researcher, and certainly probably a personal friend of yours.
He was for quite some years. We did strike up a very good and lasting relationship at that meeting. It was a providential meeting, to be sure. Tony had just been separated from the Hoover Institution that's at Stanford University. And he was very devastated by that because as a scholar, you can't publish books unless you have some type of an academic association. And so they had tossed him out, so to speak, and he lost his rights to publish, and he lost his rights to research, to use all the research tools and stuff. And he was one lost puppy, I'll tell you. He was very devastated. And the guy that forced him out, and that he was particularly upset about, was David Packard. And at the time, David Packard happened to be one of the first members of this organization, the Trilateral Commission. And some of the research that Tony was doing at the time had bumped into this group, and he was on the trail, if you will. He was like a bloodhound. In fact, he was like a bloodhound in the sense, once he gets the scent, it's "Arr!" and he's after the chase. They called it, his friends at Hoover, because he was such a voracious researcher, just a bulldog, a pit bull. They called him the Hoover vacuum cleaner as a joke. But that was Tony. Once he got on the trail of something and he smelled blood, so to speak, man, you couldn't stop him. And so he got after the Trilateral Commission while he's at Hoover, started to write a little bit about him, and David Packard got wind of it and said, "You're out of here, dude." And so Tony was pretty depressed when we met. And he knew he had a story. I had been studying the Trilateral Commission myself independently. I didn't really know what I was looking at because I was still too young and I was green and wet behind the ears, whatever. And Tony and I realized after we talked for even 30 minutes that we had a huge story and that we needed to tell it. We could not be silent. And so that's when we shook hands and said, hey, we need to let's start a newsletter. And let's do it. I had a printing facility in Scottsdale, Arizona at the time. I was already publishing books and newsletters. And I said, let's do this, man. We could do this. So he said, yeah. And that's how we got started. And we wrote and researched for several years, produced 2 books out of it, Trilaterals Over Washington, volumes 1 and 2. We did a lot of speaking, a lot of radio work, a lot of in-person speaking around the country. And, we tried to alert America as best we could. Unfortunately, the worst thing that happened to the message was that Ronald Reagan got elected. Not that Reagan was a bad guy, but he got elected, and all the conservatives in the country just said, oh, well, I guess we're all safe now. Ronnie's here. And so they just quit buying our books, supporting us. Nobody wanted to hear about the Trilateral Commission after that. Really sad. Even though George Bush was vice president under Reagan and he was a member of the Trilateral Commission, nobody was concerned about that.
What do you think is the biggest clear and present danger we have looming right now? I mean, we just got so many things happening at once. Of course, a lot of people are speculating on Jade Helm 15 and what's really behind that, whether it's just a drill, whether it's an artificial intelligence system that they're using to make command level decisions, or possibly the rollout of martial law. We really don't know what's going on there. Certainly, we have many different guests with different theories. We have the possible financial collapse. We've got the influx of these illegal immigrants through the southern border in what seems to be maybe a Cloward and Piven strategy to crash our welfare system there, and also bringing in a voting bloc. We also have the whole ICE. I mean, if I was an enemy of America, right now is a perfect time to bring your forces through that southern border while it is porous and open. It just seems to be, we've got the civil unrest. We've got so many things going on. What's the biggest thing you're watching right now?
Well, the end game for this crowd is the destruction of free enterprise and capitalism. And we need to be clear on that. This is important. It's as important to recognize this as it is to see who the enemy really is. Because once you see what the end game is and work it backwards, everything else starts to make sense, including the open border and all the other stuff happening with Jade Helm, et cetera. I'm sure you probably saw the headlines all over Drudge Report over the weekend here about Obama's massive data collection efforts to build a race database center. We'll talk about that for sure as we go along here. That's a very important part of it. But all these things will start to make sense as you realize that technocracy, which is what has been pushed since 1973 when the Trilateral Commission formed to create, quote, a new international economic order, technocracy has been in the plan from day one. And technocracy is the only replacement economic system in the history of the world that's intended to replace capitalism and free enterprise. There is no other economic system in the universe that's ever been defined on paper that specifically intended to replace capitalism and free enterprise. Now, that's an economic fact. You don't have to go to University of Chicago or whatever to find that one out. Well, you could. That's what you'd find. There's nothing else. And the United Nations just 3-4 months ago, actually it was in February, the head of climate change at the United Nations, she's the czar of climate change there. Christiana Figueres is her name. She said in a press release in Europe, or actually a press conference in Europe that was transcribed into a press release, she said, and I quote, "This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model that has been reigning for at least 150 years since the Industrial Revolution," close quote. Now, if anybody needs to read between the lines here and figure out what she said, I'll explain it.
I was going to say, what exactly is she saying there?
There's only one economic development model that has been reigning for the last 150 years. She says at least, of course. How about 5,500 years? I don't know. But she says since the Industrial Revolution. This is capitalism. She's speaking about capitalism and free enterprise. This is the same capitalism and free enterprise that Pope Francis took shots at in his recent encyclical on climate change that he did in preparation for the big upcoming meeting in this, I think it's this November, late November, at the UN on climate change. Capitalism is on the chopping block. That's the bottom line. If people say, well, so what if capitalism, dies or whatever? They don't think through what would this mean.
Well, what does that look? Let's think about that.
Everything in our known world today is based upon capitalism and free enterprise. Everything. Your jobs, the goods you buy that you find available to buy at the store, everything that you buy with money. Money itself is predicated on capitalism and free enterprise. The technocracy system of economics intends to throw all of that mechanism out the door and create an energy-based accounting system with its own money, like energy credits, that would be used in place of money to buy goods and services that are made available by the state, if you will, or by the technocratic economic system, based on resource use rather than simply supply and demand. That's what sustainable development is all about. That's what carbon trading and cap and trade is all about. That's what smart grid is all about. It's about putting energy at the center of the economic development and other resources as well.
Patrick,
and making economic. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please finish your thought.
Well, I was just going to say, to make economic decisions based on resources rather than on supply and demand. This is otherworldly as far as capitalism is concerned. They're not even compared. It's not just they're opposite. They're otherworldly. They don't mix. There's nothing in common whatsoever. In a technocracy, everything is run and determined by scientists, engineers, and technicians. Period.
Now,
Supply.
What does this world look like to the average listener, to the average person who's not, just waking up to things? That's a big change. I mean, that's a dynamic shift. And that's
huge.
Not going to go very easily for most people. I mean, these upper corporations have been planning for this, part of the planning of it for decades now. I have a feeling things are going to go a little bit easier for them than for, the plumber down the street.
No, that's right. There was one book, and I have to hasten to add, we haven't set this yet, but we need to say that the original technocracy model was developed starting really in earnest in 1932 at Columbia University. The group that was doing this got booted from Columbia, but they started an actual organization, a corporation called Technocracy Incorporated in 1934. And they documented their work in a book called Technocracy Study Course. It's available on the internet. Somebody scanned it and it's out there. It's not copyrighted anymore. And your listeners can get a hold of it if they want to and read it for themselves. But there was only one book back in that day that was written in 1932 that was looking straight into the face of technocracy. And this gentleman came up with this book that we know to this day as Brave New World. It was written by Aldous Huxley, who was no good guy, by the way, and he was no enemy of technocracy. But he saw a science fiction story in technocracy, and he concluded that if it runs to its end, it will result in a scientific dictatorship. And I hasten to add, if today's world isn't looking more and more like a scientific dictatorship to people, you're not paying attention or you're not breathing. This is where it's headed.
Patrick,
scientific dictatorship.
You're right on. You're spot on. You're absolutely spot on. And people say, the politicians can help. We need to vote the right people in. If this plays out to its end, based upon from what I read, they despise politicians. They don't want politicians involved at all. The politicians, the current Senate and House, and your politicians that you call politicians, they'll have no say so in this at all. If this runs to its course to the end, is that not true?
Well, it's not only not true, but it's observable right now. If anybody, if any of your listeners could call in and tell me how Congress today has any control over the executive branch, I'd sure like to know it. They're just as useless as I don't know what. They're just completely impotent these days.
Checks
Whatever
and
the executive
balances.
branch wants to do, they just go and do it, and Congress hasn't been able to stop them, hasn't been able to slow them down. And by and large, I have to say, Congress doesn't even know what the heck they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. Look at the Ed Snowden revelations. How many in Congress knew what was going on that Ed Snowden released to the public? Did any of them? No. Everybody was surprised. Oh, I can't imagine such a thing was happening. It was going on right under their nose, and they didn't have a clue. Well, Congress has been very methodically cut out of the picture, and they're just totally useless today. I hate to say that because I revere the Constitution, but the executive branch has been hijacked since at least 1976 with the election of James Earl Carter, a member of the Trilateral Commission, and his running mate, Walter Mondale, a member of the Trilateral Commission. And the executive branch has been dominated by these people ever since. And they have executed policies that have methodically cut Congress out of it. And yes, technocrats hate politicians. Of course, a lot of people in America hate politicians too for some of the same reasons. They're incompetent, they're ignorant, they tend to graft. Some of them are just flat out charlatans, and there's lots to be angry with politicians on. But I can tell you one thing: sending different politicians to Washington, representatives that is, or senators, is a worthless activity at this point. It'll do no good. It won't change anything, because these people have insulated themselves within the executive branch to make sure that they're untouchable.
Pat,
At this point, they are.
one of the things that has really got me worried, and you kind of touched on it with Edward Snowden, is this Trans-Pacific Partnership. It seems that this is really, really some bad news coming our way in a very, very real way. The fact that the lawmakers weren't even allowed to see it unless they signed non-disclosures, and really the only information we got on it was that which was leaked to us by WikiLeaks. I was wondering if you might be able to comment on your thoughts on what's happening with the TPP and how that's also going to affect us.
Well, here's the bottom line on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Number one, the U.S. trade representative who negotiates these trade organizations, or these trade treaties, the current USTR is Michael Froman. He's a member of the Trilateral Commission. Now, somebody's going to say, so what? Let me back up just a minute and give you the rest of the story. Since 1976, when the USTR position was created with Jimmy Carter, there have been 12 USTRs appointed by the president, by the various presidents over the years. And yes, they are the men that go out, or women that go out and negotiate all the trade agreements that some have been maybe pretty good, but others have been disastrous, like NAFTA, for instance, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement. The Trans-Pacific Partnership and its partner, the new thing coming alongside of it, is also the Transatlantic Partnership Agreement, the TTIP. Those two trade agreements cover over 80% of the world's gross domestic product economically. And I would hasten to add, since technocracy is an economic being, that it deals with economic issues, not just political issues. And so analysts that have seen the TPP text conclude that only about 20 to 25% of the text have anything to do at all with trade. Some 80% has to do with governance. That is not government, governance. That means regulation is designed to rule over people and systems. And between these two treaties coming up, this will radically change the economic structure of the world. It'll push the world towards climate change. It will push the world towards sustainable development and all the Agenda 21 stuff that goes along with it. It's going to shove it right into their arms. And so when I say that there's been 12 U.S. trade representatives over all these years, including Michael Froman, no less than 9 of those USTRs have been members of the Trilateral Commission. Now, there's reason enough to understand why they hijacked the executive branch, because the executive branch has control over the trade mechanism of the whole world. And so Michael Froman is negotiating a treaty or an agreement not on behalf of the American people at all. We have no mind share in this. He's negotiating this treaty or agreement on behalf of the interests of the Trilateral Commission, which is to implement technocracy. I can't say it any more plain. That's it.
You know, Patrick, we hear about the CFR, we hear about the Bilderbergs, we hear about the Royal Institute of International Affairs, we hear about all these different organizations, but it sounds to me like the titular head of all this is the Trilateral Commission, and they are probably one of the most recent of those groups. Is it because of just the power players involved in the Trilateral Commission that's just the go-to group? And I know they're involved, of course, in policy making, of course, with this country, and they have their hands in almost every single institution you can think of. Are they really essentially the top of the pyramid when it comes to, and I'm going to use this term loosely, when it comes to evil organizations? To put it plainly, are they towards the top? You think the Trilateral Commission?
Well, they definitely are towards the top. I've never claimed that they are the top. And I'm certain there's families in the world, or there's people in the world that are just as powerful and just as influential in many ways in policy making. But the Trilateral Commission, back when it was started in 1973, solved a very important problem for the global elite. They hadn't had much success during the 40s and 50s and the 60s in achieving their global goals. There really hadn't been any forward progress. The nation state was still gaining strength. They hated the nation state. Well, how could they get things turned around? Some academics that were early members of the Trilateral Commission wrote to the effect that the frontal approach had failed them. They needed another approach, and they called it an end run around national sovereignty to achieve their purposes. The Trilateral Commission was formed by David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski with encouragement from the 1972 Bilderberg group that met in Europe. They came back in 1973, formed the organization to start it, and they did. They chose members from Europe, Japan, and North America, a diverse group. And at that point, it's like the Trilateral Commission became the quarterback of the team. That's probably the best way to look at it. They became the quarterback. The quarterback calls the shots. The quarterback's the one that drives the plays down the field. The quarterback is not the team, but you can't play a game without the quarterback. You have to have somebody in charge. And these guys are the ones that have actually gone out and done stuff. And, proof in this is there's a number of ways to look at it to prove the concept. But you don't find the CFR itself uh, appointing people like the Trilateral Commission did to these important posts of government, even though a lot of members of the CFR ended up in government, and yes, they did. I'm not denying that. They had a huge influence. But the CFR is a policy organization. It's not a command and control organization. The Trilateral Commission is. It had shoe leather. It set a strategy to take over governments and influence governments. And it's executed those policies over the years pretty much all by itself. So it doesn't mean that they're the only ones in the world that have any money or that have any influence or that have, whatever, but they have become the self-appointed quarterback for the implementation of technocracy in the world. And they have involved and used, of course, the United Nations to provide a contagion for their crackpot ideas that have now been spread all over the world, thanks to the United Nations. And, they continue to push. They can, they're still out there. They're still executing the same kind of stuff. Like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement is just a perfect example. It's just one more log being thrown on the fire. And if these people aren't stopped, I have to say, we need to recognize who they are. But if they're not stopped, and if somehow we can't throw a monkey wrench into their mechanisms, they will have their way, they will finish their project, and the world will be forever changed. Freedom, liberty, and free enterprise will be out the door. And essentially a feudalistic system that that has complete totalitarian control by scientific methods will take over the world and kick us back into the dark ages again, essentially.
Pat, you talked about China in your book, and we see a lot of industry going to China. We see a lot of major corporations. It appears to me that China is going to be the next place that the globalists are going to, let's say, build up and try to, basically the same thing that happened in America. Perhaps, that's some of the speculation. But in your book, you pointed out that it looks like China has been on board with the whole technocratic thing for many years now. And perhaps that's why, because I know Rockefeller was had very close relations with China back in, I want to say, the early 70s. And I think they really tried to hatch their technocratic plan there in China first, if I remember correctly. Can you comment on that?
Well, Rockefeller's love affair with China goes back to the early 1900s. And he never gave it up. The Rockefeller family was incredibly close to China all the way along, even during the Communist Revolution era. But that aside, that relationship was there the whole time. But when China was first opened up, you have to go back and kind of look at the circumstances around that. The history books don't necessarily record this, but I was there and I saw what was going on. The first person that went to China, illegally, I might add, Secretary of State at the time, working for Richard Nixon, was Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger, this was before 1970, but Henry Kissinger was one of the first members of the Trilateral Commission. And Kissinger made a secret clandestine trip to China, which was our sworn enemy, by the way. It would have been like John Kerry making a secret trip to Iran today without any permission from anybody, Congress or otherwise, to go and go secretly to Iran to start negotiations or whatever. But Kissinger did, and he opened up a conduit with China to come back into the civilized world. Zbigniew Brzezinski picked up that thread in 1976 when he was appointed by Jimmy Carter to be his national security advisor. Zbigniew Brzezinski is credited as being the person who normalized relations with communist China to bring it back into the developed world, especially the economic world. Never mind that they were still a communist dictatorship at the time. And then what happened all around that time was that Western firms associated with the Trilateral Commission made a stampede to China to build up China's infrastructure, to start planting the seeds of industrial revolution in China. Where did the money come from? Did China have a big bank account of its own to do these things? No. It came from the West. It came from Wall Street. It came from the big corporations. And for instance, before it was legal, before Congress even gave permission for any U.S. company to go to China, Bechtel Engineering, which was the largest privately held engineering company in the world, based in Northern California, Bechtel Engineering already accomplished some 18 major infrastructure projects in China with no permission from anyone in the United States to do so. It was patently illegal what they did. They were never held to account for it, but they made a bloody fortune on it. They paved the way for other Western firms to go over there and take advantage of what they had done. And the head of Bechtel Engineering, the CEO, was a member of the Trilateral Commission. You start to get the idea that the people who benefited from China opening up as an economic power were the same people who did the opening up. And that's the fact.
Sure seems to be that way.
And so today you say, well, China's marching to its own drum. You know, China's doing its own thing. They're our mortal enemy. They're doing this. They're doing that. And I chuckle every time I hear this because I think it's just a false narrative altogether. China is in the pocket of these people 110%. They built them up. They made them everything what they are today. They would have nothing were it not for what members of the Trilateral Commission brought to them, and then the West in a larger sense as well. And they wouldn't be where they are today were it not for that. Now, here's the proof in the pudding, though. China was identified in 2002 by Time magazine as a technocracy. For the right reasons, I might add. It was in context. And they noted that all of China's Politburo were scientists and engineers who had at least a master's. Almost all of them really had a PhD in some kind of advanced science. And they are running the country as a technocracy, not as a communist dictatorship. Well, where'd they get that idea? Well, son of a gun, if you go back and you look at 1974 onwards, who was giving them all of the intellectual capital to do what they did? Well, it was the same people in the Trilateral Commission. They filled them full of technocracy. And they appointed technocrats to run the country at the top level. And China is today basically what it is. It's a technocracy on a more global basis than any other area, except maybe for the European Union. And everybody still looks at China as a communist dictatorship. It's not. It's a technocracy now, and they got their technocratic underpinnings from the people that are trying to do it to us today.
Patrick, you started off as an economist by education and then moved on to becoming a financial analyst and a writer. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was in your life that woke you up? What was it that kind of opened your eyes that things aren't as they appear to be?
Well, I was one of the early gold bugs in the early 1970s, and that was right after gold had been decoupled from the dollar. And I saw a great opportunity just from an investment point of view. I didn't have any great, deep political insight at that point to anything. But when Jimmy Carter got elected, my curiosity was sparked because he ran as a poor boy peanut farmer from Georgia. He said he didn't know anybody in Washington, and that he didn't know how he was going to fill his cabinet even. And then when he actually got to Washington, and I might add, he carried a big black Bible back in those days. Often he ran kind of as a Bible-believing Christian too. That probably was enough to push him into office. But once he got into office, he started appointing all these people to his cabinet positions, and they were all members of the Trilateral Commission. I was just watching that. I don't know. I was just watching the parade go by. I was minding my own business, sort of. And the more I saw, every time I see this, somebody new appointed, stamped right on it as member of the Trilateral Commission. I thought, what the heck? It's not like, this doesn't smell right. That's really what got me started in looking into this in greater detail. And when I met Sutton, because before that I had no idea what to do with it. I mean, I saw the pattern, but I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't know what anybody could do about it. But when I met Sutton, who was a world-class researcher already, and he confirmed to me that what I was seeing was worth looking at, all of a sudden, something sparked inside. And I said, you can't let this pass. It's kind of like, the feeling you get is kind of like if you're driving down the street and you witness a crime. Somebody pulls out a gun or something, shoots somebody else, or some big guy, hits a woman and knocks her to the ground and she's laying there in the ground, and you drive by in a car. You see the whole thing and you drive by. Do you just keep driving and forget about it because it's none of your business? Or do you have any moral obligation to either take action immediately to protect life and limb, and or to report it to the correct authorities? Well, I would choose the latter. You can't just drive by. My conscience would bother me for the rest of my life. So I couldn't just drive by in a sense, I couldn't just drive by the Trilateral Commission, what they were doing, because once Sutton confirmed this is exactly what they're doing, we were literally witnessing the biggest crime, the biggest heist in the history of the world, because the executive branch of the biggest government, most powerful government in the world, had just been hijacked by rogues, by rogue agents.
Pat,
you just can't walk away from that.
No, you can't. You can't. Of course not. Pat, we'd love to have you stay on after the break. We're coming up on the break here because we haven't even touched really the whole Snowden thing and the data collection, the data mining, and just the absolute enormous. I mean, some of the numbers you were going over in your book, I can't even zettabyte and all these different. Man, I mean, the amount of data capacity is just overwhelming. But in that vein, as I was reading your book, I started thinking. What I started feeling like eventually, if they have their way, I'll be just like a piece of produce in the grocery store, or like a gallon of milk, or like a cucumber. I mean, that's how really they're going to treat people. I hate to simply break it down, but we're all going to be managed. We're all going to be. It's just the most insidious form of slavery that I can possibly think of, especially when they take away your ability to travel and your ability, for free enterprise. Your credits are going to be based upon your consumption and probably a lot of other factors. But once those credits run out, you're done. You have no more credits unless you can black market some. I mean, I really, it's almost like we're just being categorized and filed away like a nuisance. Like we're some sort of a nuisance. Do you get that feeling, Pat?
Yes, I do. I feel like I'm in a feedlot. I'm one head of cattle in a feedlot of 50,000. And we're all getting force fed and driven down the line, driven down the corrals, and get ready for the old slaughter yard somewhere, the slaughterhouse. But yeah, it's not a good feeling right now at all.
Well, Pat, we've got a few minutes before the break. Before we do that, can you let people know where they can get your book, where they can get more information, any newsletters and whatnot you may do? Where can they get more information on what you're doing?
Absolutely. My book website is technocracyrising.com. It's easy to find. Just search on Google for technocracy and my website will come up. You can also go to amazon.com. You'll find the book there. Just search for Technocracy, the word Technocracy, or Patrick Wood. It'll come up. And there's also a Kindle version people can buy. If they like a tablet or a computer to read on, you can get the Kindle version. If they buy a copy from me on technocracyrising.com, I'll be happy to sign it before I send it out. I've made that my practice. So your choice, wherever you'd like to get it. The key is to get it. It connects the dots, in ways that have never been connected for. And I hate to say it, for all the talk on technocracy in the world today, even the Pope is talking about technocracy. There's only one book in the world today in print that accurately talks about and defines technocracy, and that's Technocracy Rising. I can't believe it. I'm ashamed of fellow writers, researchers, economists, etc., because there ought to be 100 books by now. There's only one. I hope we can change that. But you need to read the book. That's all there is to it.
Well, it certainly lends a lot of clarification, a lot of clarity, I should say, on the interconnectivity of all these, seemingly different and dispersed agencies. They are actually working together in concert, it seems, in this, this massive web of, information gathering and really technocracy, as you describe it. Maybe we can, after the break, Pat, we can actually define in your terms technocracy in the simplest way so people listening can understand, and then we'll go into the data collection, the Edward Snowden stuff. How about that?
All right, folks. Good. We are here with author Patrick Wood talking about Technocracy Rising. We'll be back on the other side of the break here on the Liberty Brothers radio show. Stick with us. We'll be right back.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
All right, folks, and welcome back to the Liberty Brothers radio show. We are coming to you live out of the great state of Montana. As always, at the top of hour 2, I want to encourage our listeners to do their part to help support Revolution Radio. We are the largest listener-supported internet radio network in the world. That takes some doing. So please, if you love the programming you get here, do your part to help keep us on the air. You can do that by going to freedomslips.com, click on that donate button, and giving what you can. Also want to thanks to our sponsors. We've got Lulzbot, maker of the 3D printer, the Lulzbot Mini. Also MSI Tactical, that's msi-tactical.com. And we also have Stem Cell Works. And if you haven't checked this guy out, folks, it really does work. There's an intraoral spray. And it's a synergistic system that combines 3 different products to actually help you make and release your own adult stem cells. Helps with focus, energy, all kinds of different things, but mostly helps with recovery time. For those of you who know, I'm an amateur fighter. I'm always training martial arts, and one of the ways I really am able to do that is through this Stem Cell Works. If you're interested in checking it out, you can go to Stem Cell Works. That's WORX. StemCellWorks.com to let them know you heard about them through the Liberty Brothers radio show, or just put Liberty in the coupon code. You get 25% off, free shipping, and money back guarantee, so you got nothing to lose. Check it out, folks. All right, well, we are back, and we have author Patrick Wood with us, author of Technocracy Rising. We've had all kind of great conversations so far. I want to thank you for coming on the show with us today, Patrick. Where were we just before the end of the break there, Jim? We were going to go into something here.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Patrick to really give his definition of technocracy, but perhaps something that would be more illustrative would be if he could explain what would America look like, Patrick, if they were able to carry out their plan to its logical end for them. What would America essentially look like? An America completely in the grasp of these technocratic elites?
Well, it would look like a compromise, perhaps, between Brave New World, written by Aldous Huxley in 1932, and George Orwell's 1984 book, which was written in 1948, which also was looking at technocracy as its source of inspiration. It will result in a totalitarian scientific dictatorship. And you'll understand what scientific dictatorship means when we're done talking about the data collection issue, I think. So I won't jump ahead at this point, but we'll get there. I know when we talk about the data, when you realize what the data is for, is being collected, you'll get an aha moment, I think, before we're done.
Well, why don't we start talking about that a little bit? I mean, we've seen an implementation of data collection unlike anything we've ever seen before, and we only know the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we only know what Edward Snowden and some of these other whistleblowers have pointed out. And I think that to the average person on the street, they don't even understand. They think, well, I've got nothing to hide, so why should this bother me? Well, I mean, it goes so much further than any of us have ever imagined. It goes so much further than the metadata that they're talking about. It really is a record of our entire lives that then go back and search. So let's talk about that. Some of the different programs. We've got Prism and whatnot. Can you break that down for us, kind of where it started and where it's going?
I can. Let me start by giving just a very succinct definition of technocracy. And I'll lay this off on a magazine called The Technocrat in 1938. I just lifted a quote out of one of their magazines, and here it is. This is their definition. Technocracy, this is a quote, technocracy is the science of social engineering, the scientific operation of the entire social mechanism to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. Now, you can see the economic, close quote, you can see the economic nature of this, to produce and distribute goods and services to the entire population. Who's going to decide what goods and services to produce to the entire population? Not the population, no. It's the scientists and engineers that are running this social engineering project. They will decide what gets produced and distributed to the entire population. So this is a top-down type of management system of the whole economy where the people have no say whatsoever. But having said that, in any case, a general definition of technocracy. Let me read you the first 5 requirements of technocracy that were defined in their Bible, if you will, for technocracy, called the Technocracy Study Course. It was written by Howard Scott and by M. King Hubbard, the 2 co-founders of Technocracy in 1934. Just listen carefully to these 5. They're very short, and I'll read them verbatim. And by the way, they only had 7 requirements. These are the first 5. Number 1. Number 1, quote, register on a continuous 24-hour per day basis the total net conversion of energy. Number 2, quote, by means of the registration of energy converted and consumed, make possible a balanced load, close quote. Those 2 requirements right there sum up everything you need to know about smart grid today and the smart meters that are being put on the sides of homes and businesses, not only in America, but also in Canada and Mexico and Europe, in China and Asia, in Africa, and every other country in the developed world. This sums up the requirement for smart grid right here. A balanced load. You'll see that phrase in every literature you look at on smart grid today. Number 3 requirement for technocracy, quote, provide a continuous inventory of all production and consumption. Number 4, quote, provide a specific registration of the type, kind, etc. of all goods and services where produced and where used. Number 5, quote, provide specific registration of the consumption of each individual, plus a record and description of the individual, close quote. I read that slowly so that everybody could kind of let it sink in just a little bit. But what we have here in the last 3 requirements that I just read are the basis for 100% of the data collection going on today. This is an outgrowth, a natural outgrowth of technocracy. It was core to the implementation of technocracy. First, there was smart grid and the control over energy. Secondly is the data, the monitoring system that must be put in place in order to control the technocracy system. It's a monitoring system. The more data they have, the better the scientists and engineers believe that they can fine-tune the system to make it work according to their scientific method, which is far from being scientific. You understand, it's pseudoscientific method is what it should be called. But this is the model that they wrote in the 1930s. They didn't have the technology back then to do these things. They knew they didn't have the technology completely, but they understood where IBM was going, even back in those days, with their early tabulators that they were making. But now today we do have the technology, and guess what? They're using it. And when the headline reads, like on Drudge Report, for instance, refers to an article on New York Post where it says Obama collecting personal data for a secret race database. I love the headline. It's a pile of hooey as far as the headline goes, because it's not Obama. You know, Obama doesn't have a clue. He's a more empty suit than Jimmy Carter was in 1976. He's a figurehead, but the people behind him that are driving him, these technocrats, have set up this data collection system to be used for any part of society that they choose to manage. Basically, it's all of it. 100% of it. This article actually from New York Post alludes to this almost in every paragraph. It's amazing. It says, the first paragraph says, a key part of President Obama's legacy will be the Fed's unprecedented collection of sensitive data on Americans by race. The government is prying into our most personal information at most local levels, all for the purpose of racial and economic justice. The second paragraph starts out, this Orwellian style stockpile of statistics includes a vast and permanent network of discrimination databases, blah, 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 blah. But you notice everybody recognizes this Orwellian style stockpile of statistics. What they don't realize is that Orwell was writing about technocracy, and it all fits perfectly. Well, you can't look at it once you see technocracy and look back at the historical record. You can't miss how this jigsaw puzzle is coming together. It's a perfect fit. All the pieces fit.
You know, you talk about 1984, and one of the things I remember in 1984 was the camera that was in their house that would monitor everything they would do. And then you fast forward to today, and of course, admittedly, now there's cameras and listening devices inside your televisions, your large screen televisions, flat screen TVs, whatever you want to call it. You know, so you're seeing these things that were joked about when 1984 came out, and it's almost as if that's a blueprint that they've been using to operate. And I tell you one thing, Pat, they're really coming awful close to having a lot of these things in 1984. Expecting the 2 minutes of hate to come along anytime soon. You know what I mean, brother?
Well, look, understand that both 1984 and Brave New World were looking at technocracy to get their inspiration. Now they're different books. Admittedly, they're different books. They have different aspects. Different things are brought out. The totalitarian nature of it is a little bit different depending, how you look at it. But they both had their source in technocracy. They read the same quote that I just read to you from 1934. The Technocracy Study Course. They had a chance to look at that book. They had the chance to read the magazines and stuff that were coming out. These people were talking about, and that was their That was their impression of where it was headed if it was left just to itself. And obviously they had a slightly different view, but they had a lot in common, didn't they? Totalitarianism is one. Everything was decided for you. You had the right to decide nothing. And so when you make a statement today now, for instance, that, gee, it seems like this is just by plan. Okay, well, let's just work backwards. If technocracy is being implemented today, and if that's the same technocracy that was designed in 1934 and 33, and if two people happen to write a fiction book in between then and now, well, the fiction book had no substantive thing on this at all. It's the actual hardcore requirements of technocracy that are being implemented today, period, into subject. This is where the pattern fits. I could write another science fiction book about technocracy and make it different, have a different flavor than either one of Brave New World or 1984, but I'm still looking at the same technocracy. Technocracy is being implemented today. The same technocracy that was developed in the 1930s. That is a demonstrable fact of history. Just looking at it and studying it, there's no way to come to any other conclusion. This is technocracy that's being implemented today. So yeah, some of the things that 1984 that Huxley saw are coming true today, and yes, some of the things that Orwell saw are coming through today. And the writer of this article, his name is Paul Sperry, in New York Post, talking about Obama collecting personal data. In the first 3 or 4 paragraphs, the second paragraph, he says Orwellian style stockpile. Okay, he references Orwell. And then in the third paragraph, he starts out, Big Brother Barack wants the databases operational. Well, Big Brother came from 1984. So you see how it fits? They're still works of fiction, but they're in the common vernacular today. Everybody speaks that way. Oh, it's Big Brother. Oh, it's a Brave New World. It's Orwellian. Yeah, it's technocracy. We just need to call it what it is. It's technocracy.
It really is, and it's really gone further than I think we at least back in '84. It seems to be so much worse now than we would have thought to have been. And the fact that so many people just again are not awake to it. Let me ask you this: you've mentioned a couple times now that as things get worse, people will begin to wake up out of their matrix, so to say. What's some of the best ways you've found, other than obviously writing's a great venue, just everyday life? How do you go about breaking someone out of the matrix, or is it something that they've got to kind of come to on their own? Or do you have a reading list of different works that you point people at, different websites? How do you go about waking people up?
They have to come out of it on their own, really, before almost they read anything. If they don't see that there's a problem, without anybody telling them there's a problem, they don't need any solutions. They're not going to be open to any solution. And I've talked to many groups where there's full of people like that. They don't see a problem. They don't see a need for a solution. So you can't sell a solution to somebody who doesn't see a need for one. But people that get hungry for information, when they really start sensing, there's something seriously wrong here, they'll start to look for information and stuff, and hopefully they'll stumble across books like Technocracy Rising. Unfortunately, there are no other books currently talking about technocracy per se that will really connect the dots in the way that we've connected them. And honestly, I think that's the right way to connect them because history really bears it out. But I'll give you an example of some of the wake-up call that's coming. Just this last week, Oregon announced a new vehicle miles travel tax that will be calculated based on a GPS transmitter put in your automobile, and it'll track your whereabouts, your comings and goings and stuff, and it will transmit your GPS data back to an analysis center, a back office, if you will, where first your mileage will be noted, but a tax will be created for you. Special tax. Don't you feel special already? A special tax will be created for you based on your carbon footprint. Oh, now where would they find out about your carbon footprint? Well, how about somewhere in the bowels of Obama's race database, as they call it? Not that it's a race database, it just happens to have racial information in it. It's stupid to say it's just a race database.
Right.
Your carbon footprint can be calculated from 1,000 different sources in government right now. It's all out there. How big your house is. What kind of electrical appliances do you have? How much energy do you use? Do you water your grass? How much water do you use? What kind of car do you have? Do you travel? Do you take a lot of business trips or pleasure trips or whatever? Do you own a gas guzzling boat? Do you ride a bicycle to work, or do you take light rail, or do you ride your gas guzzling SUV? See, all these things come in to calculate your carbon footprint. Now, if you're a good little boy and you drive a Prius and you take, 3 days a week, you ride your bicycle to work, and then you ride light rail to shop for groceries, and you live in a 1,200 square foot apartment downtown, so you don't have to, go traveling through the country all the time. Even better yet, maybe you don't own a car at all. If you're a good little boy, you won't pay but a very small tax, percentage-wise. But if you're on the wrong side of the carbon footprint equation, why, you're going to get punished big time with your tax bill. You're going to cringe when your tax bill comes. And you see, this is the kind of games that they're playing with the social engineering. They're going to have this vehicle miles travel tax that's based on other databases that are being collected at the present time to calculate your carbon footprint so they can figure how much to gouge you on the miles that you drive on the highway.
Pat, you know what this reminds me of? If you remember, you probably do, where Obama came out famously, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago, and he made the statement, and I'm paraphrasing, oh, sure, you can build a coal plant if you want to. We're going to stop you doing that. But if you do, the taxes are going to be so overwhelming that you're probably not going to be able to stay in business or something like that. He basically told anybody looking to build a coal mine that we're going to regulate and tax you right out of business, so don't even bother. This is common. Mm-hmm. This is mafia thuggery. This is like an organized mafia here that we have running things. Now, Pat, you certainly are not necessarily a Christian writer, and this isn't necessarily a Christian show. But I know, I suspect from your opening that we both come from a similar biblical worldview. Now, this smacks to me like if you've done any study in, eschatology or the Book of Revelation, you talk about sort of the beast system and things that go on with the beast system. It certainly looks like this whole apparatus that they're putting together right now would make that whole beast system we read about in the Book of Revelations very, very easy to implement if they have their claws fully in the American public and the world, really. What do you think about that?
And the world, truly. I am amazed at how many biblically oriented Christians have concluded exactly the same thing without me telling them that. And I don't lead with that in my discussions and my talks because, the fact of the matter is the fact of the matter. But I also do study such things, and I have come to my own conclusions along the way about it. And I do believe, in fact, personally, that this system that's being put together now, the scientific dictatorship, would be the optimal system to be assumed by a future figure that will appear that we know in the Bible as the Antichrist. This is the kind of system that would well serve a dictatorship during that last 7-year period of history. And I don't suggest that every time I talk, for sure. But people come up to me afterwards and they put it together. I read the Bible and it says this, that, and the other, and what you're talking about sounds like this could really fit in. I said, well, if this gives you good reason to go back and read your Bible some more, I think that would be a good thing to do. I just say, yeah, go for it. Go read some more and see if it's not true. I won't. Don't look at me to tell you. You go
Pat,
figure it out.
let me ask you this. At times I think we're too far gone to really get things back on course now. Of course, I've got my head in the news cycle often. I'm always being bombarded by all these
Yep.
negative attacks on us. So there are times that I will say that I tend to lose hope, but I feel that we can't do that. We've got to keep fighting this good fight. Do you think we're too far gone, or do you think we still have time to get this back on track, or do we? I mean, even Michael Snyder now of the Economic Collapse blog says that, we're looking at a reset, and that's really where we're going to be able to make the most differences once things kind of start breaking down. Then, what are your views on that? Do you think we're going to? We have time left to overthrow that empire?
Well, this is a tough question. Let me answer it this way. Every human evidence that we can find today, I think, points to an economic reset that will flip the world into technocracy. They have the United Nations on their side. They have most of the nations of the world on their side. They have most of the political mechanisms wrapped up, and they can pretty much do, from an autocratic point of view, anything they want to do. They're ignoring the people around the world. And now in our country, they're making military moves against our own people. For what purposes yet, we really don't know, but we see things like Jade Helm, we get very concerned. It's a grim situation. Is the situation today as grim as it was in Nazi Germany in the late 1930s? I can't, and I wasn't there, I can't answer exactly, but I know the days were very grim. Any Bible-believing Christian back in those days watching what was happening in their own country could have pretty easily concluded that it's curtains. If I lived in that time, I think I would have concluded it's curtains. It's all over. The Antichrist has arrived and he's going to destroy the world. Hitler was that kind of guy. And yet, as dark as it got, and as many people as were killed, slaughtered during that period of time, somehow God intervened in that. And Hitler and his system were destroyed for a time. Maybe not permanently, but for a time. And the world didn't end. And life got better. Europe got normalized to a certain extent. People put their lives back together. They had children. They married. They did stuff. They built businesses again. And life went on. The whole point of even bringing that up is we don't know the future. We certainly don't know what God might do. And we certainly don't know the future. We can read the signs of the times for sure, but we cannot foretell the future. That's not given to man to know the future. And so if there was what I call the possibility of a white swan event, that's the opposite of a black swan event that was defined by the book Race to the Bottom. If there's a possibility for a white swan event to happen that would potentially turn things in a different direction, I don't think we have the right or even a responsibility to say the opposite, that there's no chance to have a white swan event. We're doomed. We don't know we're doomed, until we're dead. And I would say in my own personal life that I will not pull back from any battle, conflict, or anything else until I clearly am forced to pull back by whatever forces. And we'll just see how it plays out. The situation is grim. But none of us have the right to say, well, let's just give up fighting. Let's just stop fighting. If they said that in World War II, we wouldn't be here today.
Very true.
So we keep fighting. We keep moving on. And in any case, the truth of the matter is the truth of the matter. And if America's going to die, I believe that America has a right to know who its executioner is. And that's reason enough to talk about technocracy and the Trilateral Commission.
Indeed. And you know, Pat, you hear a lot of times about a sort of a Luciferian connection with these people. You know, the things that they do to humanity are certainly evil, no doubt about it. But from your research, do you find that these interconnected groups, you know, we don't battle against flesh and blood, you know that. But you know, we've often speculated on this show that it seems like that whole force of evil is just becoming stronger and stronger. Do you find that type of connection that's been reported by a lot of fine reporters, that Luciferian connection in those groups that you talk about?
I think there's probably some worthy writing and research floating around. I wouldn't want to give credentials to one or another, but there have been connections made between, various occult and cultic groups to the global elite. I think a lot of it, well, at least from a history, it doesn't mean it's playing out that way today exactly, but it is an important area to study, historically speaking. I put it that way. The religion that's coming upon the world today is a religion unlike any that the world has seen. Even though actually they've seen it before in some form, they haven't really recognized it today as that. And in particular, it's the religion of scientism. And you have to go back and study scientism, scientism. Some place to look at good studies on scientism are some of the writings of C.S. Lewis, some of the writings of Francis Schaeffer from last century, both really good, historians and people documented stuff very well. Scientism was first defined around 1800 by the father of technocracy. His name was Henri de Saint-Simon. And he wrote, and I quote, "A scientist, my dear friends, is a man who foresees. It is because science provides the means to predict that it is useful, and scientists are superior to all their men," close quote. A dangerous statement. But scientism seems to be the religion today that's being asserted all over the planet. It appeals to Christianity. It appeals to Buddhism. It appeals to Islam. It appeals to Hinduism. It appeals to any number of other religions in the world today that are not necessarily even Christian religions. And it's sweeping the world. You'll find it in the worship of Mother Earth, Gaia, if you will. You'll find it in climate change philosophy. You'll find it in sustainable development philosophy, that Mother Earth is a functioning organism, self-aware, reasoning, able to think, and it's infested with bed bugs on planet Earth known as humans.
Like Gaia worship, right? It's like Gaia worship, is that they call it now? Gaia?
That's right.
Now,
That's right.
while we're on the subject, guys, how does this tie into the Catholic Church and what's been propagated there by the Pope? I mean, he's really pushing that sort of climate change message in this regime change as far as economic policy and government in general. How does that all tie in?
Well, I think a person should go and actually read the Pope's encyclical he wrote. It's available online. Type in your search engine, Pope Francis, and the word encyclical, and it'll pop right up at the top of the search, and go read it. It's 84 pages. It talks openly about technocracy and the technocracy paradigm, or the technocratic paradigm. And I would sum up the whole thing by referring to a press release put out by the World Council of Churches last year in 2014. The Catholic Church is a member of the World Council of Churches, so this statement sums them up as well. This was on the heels of a summit called the Interfaith Summit on Climate Change in 2014. This was in anticipation of the meeting coming later this fall on climate change at the United Nations. But the World Council of Churches summed up this whole conference they had. It was a big one. And they wrote, and I quote, "There has never been such a large amount of religious environmental activity in one location in the history of the world. This week will mark a watershed in the history of religion. It will be the time that people remember as the time when the world's faiths declared themselves irrevocably as green faiths." Close quote. That's a mouthful. The religions of the world have sold out to green faith, if you will, sustainable development. 21, global governance. They don't know it, but it's just sold out to technocracy. Nobody's really calling it that, but that's what it is, technocracy. And the fact that this summit was called the Interfaith Summit on Climate Change tells you that there were many religions involved with this, not just the Christian religions of the world. All the other major religions were represented at the summit as well. So when they say, when the council says that this will be remembered as the time when the world's faiths declared them as green faiths, they're talking about all the rest of them as well, the non-Christian religions of the world. They're all buying into the same deception. I would just rewind just a second here and note that the last time that there was a global deception was back in Genesis chapter 6 at the Tower of Babel. And this was after the flood, of course, and the Tower of Babel found the peoples of the world speaking one language, all gathered together in one purpose to build a tower that reached into heaven. And God broke up the little party and confused the languages and scattered them and basically said, you're not building that tower, and you're just going to all go your way into different parts of the world, and they did. But there has never been a global deception of this magnitude since that time. And I don't care what you look at, whether it's the major empires of the world, the Babylonian Empire, the Medes and the Persians, you look at Rome, you look at Greece, and so on. It doesn't matter what era you look at, there's never been a global deception since the Tower of Babel until today. Today, this green faith business is everywhere. It's in every possible corner of the world, and every country, and within every faith belief system, within every economic system, which of course the economics touches everybody on the planet, one way or another. And they're continuing to push it until they get global governance where they can spring the trapdoor shut. And the religious system is supporting this. It's leading the charge. It's deceiving its own members to think this is wonderful thing we're doing. That's what the Pope's encyclical is all about. He's taking basically 1/3 of humanity down the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland, saying this is the best thing since basically sliced bread. Everybody needs to get on board here. We need to ditch capitalism, and we need to move into this new global governance with, respecting Mother Earth and carefully and wisely using the resources of the earth and, putting everything back in balance again. I look at this on a global basis. All I can say is God help us all.
No, indeed.
Pat,
it's
a global deception.
Pat, switching gears real quick here, and I want to ask you this. You've seen all the reports about the rise of the robots. You've seen the robots in fast food places now that can, make 300 hamburgers an hour. I want to say now, of all places, of course, China, which I've been enlightened on China. I think there's whole restaurants in China that have robots that run things. How do robots, in your view, how do they fit in to the whole game plan of the technocrats? How are robots? Are they just going to start eliminating people and having robots really just sort of be their soulless minions?
We, robots have, I'm sure, a special place in the future to displace human workers. And people have asked, well, how come Agenda 21 document, for instance, talks about reducing the world's population back to what will bring it into balance with the consumption of the resources of the world? And there's been different estimates made on that. Some say 500 million, others say 800 million, some say 1.2 billion. But it's a long shot from where we are today at over 7 billion. And you wonder, well, how could the Earth survive if there was only, it's just to say, hypothetically, let's say there's only 1 billion people in the world somehow 20 years from now. How could the world survive? I mean, those people at the top, bottom, or whatever, how would it work? Well, if you consider the direction that the robots are going right now, about 90% of the work done by humans today could actually be done by robots in another 20 or 30 years. So the economic prosperity could still be there in a sense, but you just wouldn't need the people to actually do the work. So it's kind of a grim future, isn't it?
Doesn't sound good for us.
It doesn't sound good for us.
Or our
Not at
posterity.
all.
That's for sure.
No.
That's for
right.
sure.
It's dangerous.
What's next on your agenda, Pat? Are you going to? Is there going to be a follow up? Are you thinking about possibly doing some sort of a maybe a book tour or doing some sort of maybe a documentary? Have you? I don't want to certainly get into your business, but I'm just curious to know. This is great information. How are you? Have you any plans to expand this knowledge across the country, even to even wider audience?
There is a documentary in process right now. I won't give any details on it, but it is probably 80% done at this point. Hopefully that'll be coming out before the end of fall. I'm doing a lot of radio and media work today. I'll be ramping that up probably in September, October timeframe as well. And as far as writing another book at this point is, until this book is halfway internalized by the people that need to internalize it, I'm not going to lift a finger. I have a lot of things I could say that I'd like to say in writing, but we don't have time to just take our time anymore. I hate to say that. We talked about project management at the beginning of the program and how things tend to happen. All the good stuff tends to happen at the end of the project. Well, we don't have time to launch some kind of major project today. And so, whenever you sit down to figure out what can I do, don't look out 2 or 3 years into the future at this point. That's my best advice right now. Don't think we can just take our times. Oh yeah, we'll start this, we'll raise some money, and then we'll do this, that, and the other, and we'll launch our project 2 or 3 years from now. That may well be too late. We need action today. We need people who will begin to spread this message right this second, whether it be buying books and passing them out to friends and family and people in their neighborhoods and people in their local governments and stuff, or whether it be passing out DVDs of documentaries or passing around radio archives of shows like this to get people to listen to them and to get a response. And we still remember that 90% of the people are not going to be involved with this ever. We'll be lucky if we get 4 or 5%, that really wake up to it, but that's all we need. We don't need a great majority of people to make a difference. But if people will not wake up to the message we have now, they will not wake up to any further message that I would bring out later. That's my current thinking.
Pat, is there anything you're doing to prepare for what you see happening? I mean, there's a lot of talk about being a prepper and having food put up. Obviously, we've got some very dire times happening, coming our way. How are you preparing? How would you best suggest people who are just finding out about this begin to get ready for what may be coming?
I think the greatest preparation that somebody can make at this point, if they don't have any money, and most Americans, a lot of middle class America has no money right now at all. It's a very depressing message for those people that it's already frozen out of the economic system. For those people, the best thing they can do is get back into the Bible and refresh and renew their faith with God's word. I just cannot stress that enough. That's where people need to find their hope. And if you don't have that hope, you have nothing. If you're kind of in an unfortunate position where you have a lot of money at your disposal and you have to protect it if you was a steward, whether you're a Christian or not, you have a lot of things to sweat because there's no safe place to put your money. Gold and silver, it's tough. It's down. It's probably going lower. Dollars, stocks, real estate, man, I mean, it's a minefield out there. So there's no guarantees in the world, to say, well, you could store up food. How much food could you store up? 6 months would be cool, but let's say you could store up 6 months of food and then everything falls apart. The food system gets destroyed and the grocery stores are stripped bare and you have food for 6 months. What do you do at the end of 6 months? So you're back in the same boat everybody else is in. And would you deny your friends and family potentially sharing with them if they were in a life or death situation? Would you share what you had with them? I dare say you would. So that's not really, just storing up stuff is not really a panacea for the problems that we're going to see in the future. But this will in the end become a test of people's faith. Will you believe in scientism? Will you believe in the New World Order? Will you believe in sustainable development, climate change, and Mother Earth, and all these other things? Or will you believe in the living God who created the universe in the first place and man and placed him here on this earth to be stewards over the creation rather than the creation being stewards over man? Where will you place your hope? And I think this will be the ultimate testing ground for people in the future. They'll find out whether their faith is real or not. And if it is real, you can be sure that God will protect his own children. He always has, he always will. That's the promise in God's word. And, we don't know what's coming. We cannot predict the future. God did not give us a crystal ball. We shouldn't act like we have one. We forecast the future. We cannot predict the future.
Pat, it's often been said that if there is any political solution, it has to start locally.
Yes.
You mentioned in your book some buzzwords, and we're coming here towards the end of the interview. Great, fantastic interview, by the way. Thanks again so much for being here, and we're going to give you the opportunity to give your information out again towards the end of the show. But currently, right now, what if you could alert people to what would be the next? What should we be on the lookout for? I mean, you said you started researching people, and you saw how many people in the Trilateral Commission were being elected to office, and it kind of like threw up some red flags. Is there any the similar type of examples now that people that are just they want to believe, but they're just not getting it? Could you point at any one or two things and say, okay, just take a look at how about this? How about those buzzwords you talked about? You talked about the local politicians that use these buzzwords. If they use these buzzwords or these sentences, that gives you a pretty good idea that they're in with the globalist agenda. How about that? Can you go down that? Give us some of those sentences and some of those buzzwords that everybody should go to their local meetings and look out for these things Pat's about to say. You have the floor, Pat.
Well, exactly. You got phrases like public-private partnership. That's being used all over America, where businesses will get together with local government to get tax advantages, stuff like that. And there's councils of governments. That's another one. Councils of governments have been implemented all over our country, and almost every community in America today has some overarching council of governments running part or all of its city or county structure. Those are a big deal. You've got the general plan, like the 2040 plan, where people are trying to implement things like smart growth and land use policies. All of these kinds of things are suspect, and at least they need to be investigated to see whether they're on base or off base. I look at the local community as the last defense, if you will, the immune system of the social structure of America. If you build up your immune system, for instance, in your body, you come in contact with a cold virus or a flu virus, and hopefully you don't get it, because the virus is warded off by your immune system. If your immune system is weak, you're going to get sick at every germ you come in contact with. And that's basically kind of the way our country is right now. We're sick. We're desperately sick as a nation. Maybe we have terminal cancer in somebody's eyes, but the immune system of our nation are the local communities across our nation. You say, well, my community is itty bitty tiny. That's okay. It's still part of it. And if there's anything left to do, it's to build up our immune system by building up our own local communities and running this thinking out of our communities and restoring them back to where they need to be. You can't get your hands on President Obama. You can't get your hands on your congressman or senator. You can't get your hands on the technocrats at the EPA issuing stupid regulations for businesses. But you can go down and address the local people in your city and community and town, whether it's school board or city council or whatever. You can go down to those meetings and face them off nose to nose if necessary and challenge them. And if they don't like what you hear, get them fired and get somebody in that will put things right again. If enough people in America did this, we might have some defense when it finally comes down to the local level. And it will, by the way. It's coming to the local level. Very clear. Jade Helm is going to the local level. This is no longer just theoretical political science at a national level or an academic level. No, these are boots on the ground on a local community level. So just multiply that by 1,000 times for all these other things. Do you think that Obama's personal or his race database is not going to affect every local community in America? If you don't think that, if you don't see the handwriting on the wall on that one, man, you're asleep. It's coming.
Well, Patrick, real quick, we're coming to the end of the show. I want to give you ample time to, again, give out where listeners are new to this hour, where they can get your book, where they can get more information on what you're doing, and any sort of social media newsletters you might do. Before that, real quick, Jade Helm has been huge on what's been in the news cycle lately. What are your thoughts on it? Is it just a military exercise? Do you think they're training for something? What are your thoughts on the whole Jade Helm thing?
No, there is a lot more to it. I don't know everything, but they have no business at doing what they're doing, none at all, but they are. And I think all Americans should be concerned about it. We'll know more, after it's all done and the post-mortem is being done, we'll know more about it. But it is nothing, it can result in nothing good or positive for the American people. And I think it could result in some very negative things for the American people. But we'll see. It's not unrelated, though, I can tell you that. It's not unrelated to everything else we're talking about in terms of technocracy and economic development and so on. These people just don't tell you right up front everything, all the reasons for why they're doing something. Sometimes we have to wait till they're all done to figure it out. But we will figure it out.
Absolutely. All right, Patrick. Well, again, thanks for coming on the show. We really appreciate you taking the time off your Sunday afternoon, evening to come talk with us and our listeners. Again, give out your websites. Where can people get more information? Where can they get the book?
Absolutely. The book website is technocracyrising.com. And if you buy a book there, I'll send an autographed copy to you. Amazon.com carries the book as well. And there's a Kindle version there, as well as just buying the regular softback. It's inexpensive, not going to break the bank. I also have a blog website where my economic writings appear, and that's augustforecast.com. And for the sake of local activism, I've recently created a new type of private and encrypted social network site called localactivist.net. And if anybody is dead serious about forming local groups to take local action, localactivist.net is probably going to be the premier place to be, because it is private. And I'll tell you what, since I control the server and I control the software and I control the data and everything else, there will never be a chance that it'll be like Facebook, where your data is just given away to every Tom, Dick, and Harry that wants to pay a buck for it. So, so anyway, that's out there also, localactivist.net.
All right, Patrick. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Thank you for the work you're doing. We really appreciate everything you've been doing. All right, folks, that's the Liberty Brothers radio show for this week. We'll be back next Sunday, same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks for listening in on this Sunday afternoon.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Great job.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate the time.